She was the most beautiful and wildest princess in Europe. She not only turned her bed into a scepter of power, but also transformed her bedroom into a political salon. Throughout her life, she had countless aristocratic lovers, even engaging in affairs with her younger brother, Yi Sheng. Even on her wedding night, unwilling to endure a loveless marriage for political reasons, she went out into the streets to find young and handsome prey. A single alluring glance instantly captivated the heart of the nobleman, Rammel. However, when Rammel was troubled by his lack of money to pay for her services, she generously offered her services for free. The two then went into a corner piled with stones, indulging in passionate embraces, and parted ways at dawn. At that time, Rammel did not know that this dreamlike woman was none other than the unparalleled Queen Margot. This was during the latter half of the 16th century, a time of continuous warfare due to the conflict between French Catholicism and Protestantism. To ease the sectarian tensions and stabilize the precarious monarchy, the Catholic Queen Mother married her daughter, Princess Margot, to King Henry of Navarre, a Protestant. Soon, this highly anticipated wedding took place as scheduled in the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The venue was filled with worshippers who had come to witness the event. Everyone was eagerly anticipating the political marriage between families of different faiths, but only the deeply troubled Margot remained indifferent. When the Archbishop asked if she was willing to marry, she proudly held her head high, refusing to give a proper answer, because she had already been in love with the Duke of Guise for a long time, and now her mother had cruelly separated them to achieve this brutal political marriage. A suffocating silence hung in the magnificent hall for a long time. Just when it seemed impossible to resolve the situation, her brother, the King of France, suddenly intervened. With a forceful grip, she held onto Prince Marco. At this moment, the princess, once hailed as a woman of divine wisdom, had completely become a sacrifice in a political game. Following this, Protestants from various regions rose to offer their respects, blessing the newlywed couple, a mismatched pair, with wishes for a long and happy marriage. But the couple knew full well that their marriage had nothing to do with love. Marco, from beginning to end, didn't even glance at his bride. He then bluntly stated, "I only married you for the sake of the greater good. Don't expect me to share a bed with you." The Queen Mother knew her daughter's temperament well. Therefore, she had already arranged for the beautiful maid Charlotte to seduce and monitor Henry. Meanwhile, Marco's brothers were secretly plotting, speculating on who had spent the night in Marco's chambers, deciding who would claim their sister tonight. After this tedious and hypocritical wedding ceremony concluded, Marco eagerly went to the central hall, choosing his partner for the night. To win Marco's favor, the brothers who had rushed there began to compete fiercely, even resorting to violence, ultimately resulting in a confession from one of them. This brought a knowing smile to Marco's lips. After Marco left, the extremely agitated priest, taking advantage of the situation, started a fight with Henry, but was easily subdued by the shorter Henry. A more intense conflict erupted between the two, but they were forcibly separated by the onlookers. Soon night fell, and Marco, surrounded by his entourage, arrived at the bridal chamber, where Guise had been waiting for a long time. Upon seeing him, the jealous Guise began to sarcastically taunt, "Who did you give your virginity to?" Marco could only gently comfort Guise, saying, "Although I thought I had forgotten which brother I gave my virginity to, but I've decided to give you my wedding night." Just as the two were about to get intimate, Maggie's maid rushed in to warn them, "Your husband is here." In a panic, Maggie quickly hid C in a secret room, then pretended to welcome Henry's arrival. In reality, Henry wasn't there to celebrate their wedding night. After all, he was currently in Catholic territory, and as a leader of the Protestant faith, he could be assassinated at any moment. At that moment, he urgently needed reliable protection, and that person could only be Maggie, because only the two of them in the entire royal family shared the same fate. Both were merely pawns used for political gain. So he proposed an alliance with Maggie, assisting him in becoming the King of France. In exchange, he would use all his power to protect Maggie after he lost his influence. But Maggie was in no mood to negotiate with Henry at the moment. C was waiting inside, and he was also afraid that C would leak the conversation between him and Henry tonight. In his panic, he avoided eye contact and subtly hinted to Henry to stop talking. But Henry didn't understand Maggie's meaning and continued to try to persuade him, saying that he was just a tool used by his mother and brothers, including his lover and the priest. They only wanted to use him to gain power. Now, his best choice was to ally with him. To quickly get rid of Henry, Maggie gave him an ambiguous answer, and only then did Henry leave. Afterwards, C came out from his hiding place. After hearing all this, he lost all interest and, ignoring Maggie's pleas, left the room. However, just as his sexual desire had been aroused, Marco, how could he give up such a good opportunity? So, he immediately put on his mask and walked the crowded streets of Paris, filled with Protestants, looking for prey. Just then, he saw a man's belongings being stolen by a robber, and his gaze was drawn to the man who had been robbed. He then picked up the book the robber had dropped and returned it to L'Amour. L'Amour's handsome and slightly frail appearance instantly aroused Marco's protective instincts, while Marco's unique nobility and mystery also captivated L'Amour. Afterward, the two hid in a corner and passionately indulged themselves. Originally, he thought it was just a fleeting romance, but in that moment of intimate connection, the two were inextricably bound by fate. Before dawn, Marco disappeared into the darkness, and Lamore took the only book to a pawn shop. The owner showed great interest in the hunting book and couldn't help but strike up a conversation with Lamore. He asked Lamore what he intended to do in Paris. Lamore replied that he had come to find his friend, the French general and Protestant leader, Coligny. However, the owner told him some unfortunate news. A few minutes earlier, Coligny had been attacked and was now in critical condition. Lamore realized that this must be the work of the Queen Mother. In France at that time, religious beliefs and political loyalty were not entirely opposed. Many nobles in the court were Protestants, and Coligny was one of them, and also one of the leaders of the Protestants. This made the Queen Mother wary of Coligny for a long time, and she was very worried that the Protestant power led by Coligny would threaten her power, so she repeatedly tried to assassinate Coligny. Now, the fact that Coligny was attacked again on such an important occasion must be related to the Queen Mother. By the time La Mole rushed to the street, he saw Coligny, bleeding profusely, being escorted to safety by the Huguenots. At the same time, Margot also learned of the assassination attempt on Coligny and immediately guessed that it was the work of her mother and several brothers. The next target was likely Henry, so she quickly persuaded Henry to leave France immediately. However, Henry was unwilling to abandon his people, and a group of Huguenots simply didn't believe him, thinking it was a trap set by Margot. In fact, as Margot suspected, everything was orchestrated by the Queen Mother. From the beginning, she didn't genuinely want to use this wedding to quell the conflict between Catholics and Protestants, but rather to use the wedding as an opportunity to eliminate the leaders of the Huguenots. However, the assassins she sent failed to kill Coligny, and the assassination attempt further intensified the conflict between Protestants and Catholics. Thousands of angry Protestants sought an explanation from the Queen Mother. In desperation, the Queen Mother chose to resolve the trouble she had caused through a brutal act of revenge. She and her sons pressured the king to issue an order to massacre the Protestants. The king was a weak-willed puppet ruler, and the power in the court had always been in the hands of the Queen Mother and General Coligny. But because of Coligny's close relationship with the king, like that of a father and son, the king was always reluctant to issue the order. Finally, under the immense pressure from the Queen Mother and others, he could only painfully issue the order to massacre the Protestants. That night, known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, as the bells tolled for the fifth night, Guise led his soldiers in a surprise attack on the Protestant nobles attending the wedding. They stormed into Coligny's residence and beheaded him. Meanwhile, flames engulfed the streets, and tens of thousands of Catholics in Paris, fueled by religious fervor, carried out a bloody massacre of the Protestants in the city. Under the double stimulus of bloodshed and religious fanaticism, they completely lost their minds, becoming bloodthirsty monsters. Even Lamore, resting in his hotel room, couldn't escape the carnage. He was attacked by the fanatical Catholic, Corna. Fortunately, Lamore reacted quickly, leaping from the upper floor to escape, though severely wounded. He stumbled into the Louvre Palace, coincidentally entering Margot's room. That night, Margot was deeply saddened by the bloody massacre. She didn't want to see anyone killed in front of her again, so she threatened Corna, who had broken in, saying that if she wanted to kill Lamore, she would have to kill her first. But the bloodthirsty Corna didn't stop, even attempting to attack Margot. At the last moment, Margot's maid and guards arrived, repelling Corna and successfully saving Margot and Lamore. Afterwards, Margot helped him undress and gently cleaned his wounds. Through the layers of blood, she was surprised to discover that he was Lamore, the man she had encountered on the street earlier. These two unexpected encounters made Margot feel that it was all God's will, and she unconsciously developed feelings for him. However, before she could treat Lamore's wounds, she suddenly received a message from Charlotte, stating that the Queen Mother wanted to kill Henry and requesting Margot's help. They rushed to rescue him. Although Charlotte was the wife arranged by the Queen Mother to be by Henry's side, after spending time together, she had fallen hopelessly in love with Henry and was willing to go through fire and water for this love. Upon hearing the news, Margot rushed back to the palace in a panic. She desperately tried to protect Henry, shouting to everyone with great emotion, "You cannot kill my husband. Although he is a Protestant leader, he is also the one with whom I made a marriage vow before God." Quote, seeing Margot's resolute attitude, the Queen Mother had to compromise. She coldly stated, "As long as Henry is willing to renounce his faith and voluntarily join Catholicism, then I can spare him." Seeing the unfavorable situation, in order to survive and to avenge the people in the devastated area, Henry could only reluctantly agree. Then, under everyone's gaze, Henry announced that he was abandoning his faith and joining Catholicism. At this moment, Margot finally saw the cruelty of her mother and brother. Although she was a Catholic, she could not accept this inhumane and brutal act. In her pain and anger, she couldn't help but curse, "You demons are slaughtering my people under the guise of a wedding. You have made me an unforgivable accomplice." Quote, she also accused the priest standing aside, "You butcher with blood on your hands. You have now buried all my love for you." The Queen Mother couldn't bear Margot's madness and could only insist that this was for the peace of the country, and ordered that she and Henry be confined in the innocent palace. Meanwhile, the awakened Lamore left the Louvre Palace, carrying a long sword, and found Corna, preparing to duel with him. In a fierce battle, after several rounds, the two exhausted fighters collapsed unconscious amidst the corpses. They were then taken to the outskirts by a cart carrying meteorite fragments. Just as they were about to be buried, a kind-hearted cart driver discovered that they were still alive and rescued them. A few days later, Lemuel slowly opened his eyes. After walking through the abyss of hell, his mindset had undergone a great transformation. He had already defeated Kona in the duel, and now there was no hatred in his heart. Since a Catholic cart driver could save him, a Protestant, why should he be so petty? So, he actively helped Kona, taking care of her until she recovered. Although hatred could be put aside, gratitude could not be forgotten. This gratitude prompted him to want to see Margot again, but the cart driver made him abandon this idea, telling him that Margot was a French princess, and that she and Henry were currently under house arrest, their every move being closely monitored. How could there be any chance for him to meet her? But Lemuel refused to give up. In order to rescue Margot, Lemuel traveled across the sea to England, a Protestant territory, to seek help. At the same time, the bloodshed in the Louvre gradually subsided, but secretly, the intrigue and conflict continued unabated. The Queen Mother, who was never idle, found a pawnshop owner named Zongua. It turned out that this owner used the pawnshop as a cover, and his true identity was a wizard skilled in divination. Through divination, the wizard told the Queen Mother, "Your sons will all decline. Henry will succeed to the throne and become the King of France, and Margot will become the Queen of France." This made the Queen Mother completely determined to ensure that Henry would become king. To eliminate him completely, the Queen Mother secretly prepared a potent poison and made it into lipstick, giving it to Charlotte. She told Charlotte that this was the best lip balm, and that applying it to her lips would further improve her relationship with Henry. This made Charlotte overjoyed, unaware that it was all a plot to poison Henry. This scene was witnessed by Margaret, who, feeling uneasy, nervously asked the Queen Mother, "What evil things do you still want to do to Henry?" The Queen Mother, however, told her to stop interfering and even wanted to marry her off to the King of Spain. However, Margaret firmly refused, stating, "I am already married." The Queen Mother then mysteriously said, "After tonight, you will regain your freedom." Her calculating words made Margaret feel intensely uneasy, so she quickly went to find Henry. She saw Charlotte applying the lipstick to her lips, and just as Henry was about to kiss her lips, which were coated with the deadly poison, Margaret quickly rushed over and pushed Henry away. Henry, confused, was about to scold Margaret, but then saw Charlotte on the bed foaming at the mouth, then painfully collapsing and rolling on the ground before dying. Only then did Henry realize that the Queen Mother had never intended to let him go. Suddenly, there was a rush of hurried footsteps outside. The two quickly hid in the shadows. It turned out to be Margaret's brothers coming to deal with Henry, but they only found Charlotte's body. They quickly grabbed the poisonous lipstick from the table, threw Charlotte's body out the window, and made it look like she had accidentally fallen to her death. It was a false pretense. After they left, Henry was plunged into extreme fear and helplessness. He hated his own incompetence, unable to protect not only his people but also the woman he loved. Margot gently comforted him, urging him not to give up. She told him he had to be strong to regain his freedom as soon as possible. At this time, one was a puppet controlled by his mother and brother, and the other was a puppet surrounded by enemies, whose life could be taken at any moment. Although there was no love between them, their similar circumstances sparked a deep emotional connection. In despair and tears, Margot comforted him with her body. That night, they consummated their marriage, signifying that they were no longer just husband and wife in name only. After that night, they also became firm allies. On the other side, L'Amour returned to Paris with 200 star cult followers, preparing to conduct research on Margot. He had someone find Margot's maid and learned that Margot, like himself, missed him every moment. With the help of Margot's maid, they finally met again. This time, without the masks concealing their faces, their eyes were filled with sweet and intimate feelings, expressing their longing for each other. One was a French princess, and the other was just a minor nobleman. Their love transcended the chasm of identity and status, making it especially precious amidst this conspiracy and religious hatred. Out of concern for L'Amour's safety, Margot persuaded L'Amour to give up the rescue, because under the Queen Mother's close surveillance, even a bird couldn't escape the palace, and rescuing them would be even more difficult. But L'Amour insisted on taking them out of France, and the only way to leave the Louvre Palace. The opportunity arose during the annual hunting festival, when everyone would go hunting, and the Queen Mother would relax her control over the palace. Soon it was the day of the hunt. The king, who loved hunting, rushed to the front, leading the royal nobles in search of prey. After driving a wild boar into an open area, the king thrust his spear at it, but the wild boar was startled and scattered in all directions. In the ensuing chaos, the king accidentally stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. The frightened wild boar immediately attacked him ferociously, causing him excruciating pain and prompting him to let out heart-wrenching cries for help. However, his brothers stood by coldly, watching the king being attacked by the wild boar, hoping he would die soon so they could seize the throne. At this critical moment, the kind-hearted Henry stepped forward, risking his life to fight the wild boar alone. After several rounds, he finally saved the king. Because of this life-saving act, the king immediately treated Henry as his savior. Although Henry received the king's gratitude, he missed the best opportunity to escape, forcing L'Amour and the others hiding in the forest to retreat first. Afterwards, L'Amour found Margot, who had escaped through an underground passage. The two lovers embraced tightly the moment they saw each other again, spending a wonderful time together that night. But because Henry couldn't escape, to avoid alerting the enemy, Margot had to return to the palace. When it was time to part, the two were still reluctant to separate. Lamore knew that this risky rescue of Henry would likely end badly. He asked Margot to promise him that if he were to die, she must walk in my footsteps, and kiss me often, so I know you still love me. Hearing his lover's sorrowful plea, Margot was heartbroken and firmly promised, I will definitely keep my promise to you. Margot then returned to the furnace room, reminding Henry to escape with him and Lamore. However, Henry didn't appreciate the offer, because last night he had a long conversation with the king. His heart was completely set on freedom, and the king had promised him that as long as he stayed by his side, he would always protect his safety. If he abandoned the king now, it would be tantamount to betraying this rare friendship. But Margot thought Henry was too naive, and kindly reminded him, don't forget, the king personally ordered the killing of so many Protestants. Sooner or later, he will turn on you too. Just as the two were arguing, the Queen Mother suddenly arrived. She embraced Henry affectionately like family, outwardly expressing gratitude for him saving the king. However, Betty still harbored deep suspicions about Henry, because after the hunting incident, the king began to conspire with Henry to retaliate against his younger brothers. He wanted to send the Duke of Anjou to Poland and his youngest brother to Navarre. This was undoubtedly an attempt to divide the Queen Mother's power, something she absolutely could not allow. Therefore, after returning, she once again launched an assassination attempt against Henry. Knowing that Henry also loved hunting, she planned to use poison, placing it on a book about hunting. As soon as Henry opened the book, he would be poisoned and die. Shortly after, the Queen Mother's youngest son was ordered to place the book in Henry's room. Unexpectedly, the king, feeling unwell, began reading the book. As he continued to turn the pages, the poison entered his body. Moments later, the poison took effect, and the king suddenly collapsed, writhing in excruciating pain. Unexpectedly, the pain gradually subsided, and he stood up again. Upon returning to his room, he found his hunting dog lying dead, foaming at the mouth, with fragments of his hunting book in its mouth. He took the dog's body to the physician for dissection and learned that it had died from a slow-acting poison mixed with arsenic. He suspected that the poison must have come from the physician's hands. Under his interrogation, the king realized that the person who had poisoned him was his own mother. But how could the king consider his own mother a murderer? For the sake of family honor, he could only die in silence, keeping the secret. However, knowing that the Queen Mother would not spare Henry after his death, he took advantage of a hunting opportunity to urge Henry to escape. Henry wanted to take Margot with him, but the king refused, because Margot was the only person in the royal family who cared about him, and he didn't want to lose Margot before his death. Helplessly, Henry could only leave alone. Soon after, the king's condition worsened, and unable to move, he confronted the Queen Mother with the book. The Queen Mother, unable to resist, could only beg for forgiveness, saying, I wasn't targeting you, please forgive me, my child. The king, of course, knew that her tears were not sincere. Among the princes, the Queen Mother truly loved Duke Andrew. She didn't care about his life or death. Even if the Queen Mother's actions were unintentional, it was too late to reverse the situation now. To cover up the conspiracy, the Queen Mother had to find a scapegoat, and that was Lamore, the owner of the hunting book. This book was about to become Lamore's tomb. At the same time, Henry was welcomed by the people after returning to the country. Although he converted to Catholicism, Protestants still regarded him as their leader. Afterwards, he found Lamore and instructed him to sneak into Paris again to rescue Margot. Soon, Lamore rushed to Paris, ready to cooperate with Coco to rescue Margot. As soon as they appeared near the Louvre, they were ambushed by the priests. Due to the overwhelming number of enemies, they were unable to cope and were arrested on the spot. In this critical moment, Margot came to beg the priests to spare Lamore, but the priest, who had already broken with Margot, only said, prepare to deal with him, and then imprisoned Lamore and Coco. With nowhere to turn, Margot could only seek help from the king, begging him to pardon Lamore. However, at this time, the king was already in a state of panic and had only a few days left to live. He was completely controlled by his mother, the Queen Mother. Although weak-willed, he was not completely incompetent. He had been trying to break free from his mother's control, but ultimately became a victim of the power struggle. Before his death, the king quietly told Margot, everything was done by my mother. It's not that I don't want to pardon Lamore, but to protect the reputation of the royal family, we need him as a scapegoat. Leave France immediately and find your husband, Henry, otherwise you will eventually die at my mother's hands. Quote, thus, the king died in Margot's arms. Witnessing the king's death, Margot was shocked and heartbroken. She felt despair at the infighting within her family, yet he was deeply tormented by his inability to change his family's fate. After the collapse of the royal family, Ducan successfully ascended the throne, while Lamore was sent to the guillotine. Although he could have escaped, he willingly stayed behind for Lamore, ultimately sacrificing himself. These two, despite their differing beliefs, shared a profound friendship, and in the end, both were beheaded, meeting their deaths together. The next morning, in the cold silence, Margot, the executioner's assistant, carried Lamore's head away. He removed all his personal belongings and gave them to a maid, instructing her to bury his personal belongings with Lamore's body. His world completely collapsed with Lamore's death. He fled Paris with Lamore's head, heading towards Havana where Henry was. He broke with his family in the most decisive way. At this moment, Margot was both a survivor of the power game and a victim of love. As the carriage jolted, A tear rolled down his cheek. This was the love of his life, and he would carry this memory of his lover's death forever. Queen Margot is a biographical film released in 1994, starring Isabelle Adjani and Daniel Auteuil. The film is adapted from a novel by Alexandre Dumas. Adjani, a national treasure of French cinema, won the Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival for her portrayal of Queen Margot, leaving a stunning and unforgettable impression on the film industry. The film, through Margot's perspective, depicts the cruel interplay of power, faith, and love. Margot is both a victim of arranged marriage and a rebel against court intrigue. Her beauty and vulnerability. Through its portrayal of emotions, the film acts like a mirror reflecting the tearing and struggle of human nature in extreme circumstances, especially during the night at the St. Bartholomew's Church, where Catholics indiscriminately slaughtered Protestants. This scene is both bloody and symbolic, while the love between Margot and La Mole is like a flame in the darkness, brief yet passionate, ultimately ending in tragedy with Margot carrying her lover's severed head. It makes one lament how powerless individuals are in the torrent of history, yet their love and dignity intertwine to create something brilliant. On the surface, the film depicts court intrigue and religious conflict, but internally, it analyzes human nature and power. Even though Margot is a victim of politics, she never gives up her pursuit of freedom and true love. In contrast, the Queen Mother, in order to consolidate power, does not hesitate to kill her own son. Her actions profoundly reveal the corrosive nature of power, distorting family ties and religious beliefs. Ultimately, Margot, still carrying her lover's head, continues to run, her struggle becoming a beacon of light in a dark age, expressing a silent resistance against the distortion of power. The film tells us that in an environment with no choices, maintaining the bottom line of humanity is itself a victory. Although Margot loses everything, she never succumbs to the dictates of fate. This courage, like rising from the dead, is a challenge to modern people. Life may be filled with absurdity and insurmountable darkness, but only by adhering to inner purity and love can one break through the constraints of reality and embrace a more hopeful life. Okay, that's all for today's movie sharing. Please like, comment, and share. I'm Shark, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Yeah.